and welcome back to another book review. Today I'm going to be reviewing a book by Richard Abels called Æthelred the Unready, the Failed King. This documents a king of England who had a pretty miserable go of it, but he is important for a lot of events that come later, and he is a king that was ruling during a key time of Viking influence, raids, problems in England. So he is a part of English history, and I wanted to focus a little bit more on reading about him, so I decided to give this book a read. It's quite short, it's a little over 100 pages, so not too difficult to get through, but I learned a lot and there is a lot to cover in this book. So we are going to first discuss who Æthelred is and where he fits in English history, as well as a detour into his name, because the Unready isn't quite a good descriptor of what happened or how his name even came to be. And then we're going to discuss Æthelred's life and how he was important and some influence that came out of this book. So if you like English history, if you want to read about the Saxon kings, then maybe you want to stick around for this book review. And as always, if you have thoughts and comments, please put it in the comment section down below. So where's Æthelred in English history? Æthelred is a king of England who ruled from 978 to 1013, and then again from 1014 to 1016. Things went so bad around 1014 that he wound up having to go into exile for a little bit, but he came back and was able to rule for 2 more years. Æthelred really had a rough go of it, but some of his decisions had strong influences on what would happen later, and there is some important tie-ins to things that happened later in English history. So that's where he sits. He was succeeded by Edmund Ironside after his death, but he was actually the father of Æthelred the Confessor, who was the last, if I remember correctly, last Wessex king. And Æthelred the Confessor, when he died without heir, that was the impetus for the Battle of Hastings, because William the Conqueror and Harold Godwinson both had claims to the English throne, or thought they had claims to the English throne. So he is situated very close to the end of strong Anglo-Saxon influence and the coming Normans in history, but he wouldn't know that because Æthelred was more focused on the Viking problems that were occurring in his realm. Before we go any further, we're going to take a little detour into his name, Æthelred the Unready. So the Unready part doesn't really accurately describe him, and it actually comes from a mistranslation of his name. And I have my pen and I have my notebook. So his name is actually a combination of Ethel and this red part. So these are the 2 bits. This is that crossed D. And this means noble council. So this is council. And then they gave him the pun name Unread, as in bad counsel. So noble counsel who was badly counseled. And this is due to a repeat occurrence in his lifetime of picking poor people to listen to and advise him. And that comes up again and again in his life. However, unread, which actually means bad counsel, we think of this as like negation of read, which is good counsel, or just counsel, became translated as unready as opposed to poor counsel in modern English. But this is what it originally was. Now, this is some unscientifically proven, but if I had to guess, I would be correct. Connections that I see, having a passing familiarity with several Germanic languages. I wonder if this red word is related to the following words, like der Rat in German, as well as some Danish words I'm going to write down that I am familiar with, and some Dutch words. So I'm going to write these down. So we can see the influence of that word here, which is Old English, I think. So this is German, der Rat. Then we have this word in Danish, which is like someone who gives advice. This is advice. This is a town council, and this is a Dutch word meaning advisor. So we see that it has a lot of connections to other words that are familiar in other Germanic languages. And the root of that, though, became unready, which isn't really the meaning of the word. Æthelred was, however, known to not be a very good king, and not from lack of trying. We do have to give Æthelred some credit. He was very energetic, I guess that's a word we can use, but he made a lot of mistakes. So how did he become king? Because he actually had an older half-brother. So his father, I think it was Edgar, dies, and his brother, his half-brother, Edward, so a different mother, Edward becomes king. Now, Edward was not well liked as a king. He was kind of, I think it's implied he has a bad attitude. He's he's kind of a blech king, but he doesn't rule for very long because he's murdered. And it is implied that Æthelred's mother, who was very politically conniving, was behind the murder. It's unlikely that Æthelred himself was behind the murder, as he was a child at this point, but Edward quickly becomes the martyr. He was disliked in life, it seems like, but he quickly became a martyr. Now, Edward's ascension to the throne had been contested to begin with. There was some people pushing for Æthelred. However, Edward had gotten the spot, but now that Edward is dead, Æthelred becomes the king. He's a minor, so he's ruled instead, or the regency is put in place. So we have his mother who's in charge, as well as 2 other high-ranking officials. It actually seems like things went pretty well under his mother's regency, with control of other people in the councils, I'm sure. And actually, England up to this point was quite prosperous and had not suffered a lot under Viking attack, which makes what happened next to be even more maybe shocking for the English people. So by the time Æthelred reaches the age of 16, he takes back control of his kingdom. I'm not sure what age people would usually come of age and take control of their kingdom when they were a minor. I'm not sure if 16 was normal or if that was early, but he quickly makes a lot of decisions that maybe aren't so good. So also around this time, people in his council start dying and he has to replace them, and he becomes counseled and he takes on people. He seems to be a poor judge of character. He takes on people who maybe don't have the kingdom's best interest in heart, and we can attribute some of these maybe early decisions to truly just being inexperienced. Not all of his decisions are due to inexperience. So he starts taking advice on things like what to do with monastic lands, and that isn't always in favor of his people. So he starts making poor decisions, probably at the prodding of people around him who are influencing him, and he starts experiencing Viking attacks. So up to this point, or for the living memory, there hadn't been bad Viking attacks up to this point. It was rather peaceful time, but now they're coming again, and it's causing a lot of problems. There was also a lot of issues because Æthelred didn't go out and lead armies himself, and this caused all sorts of problems, as sometimes armies would disband when they learned the king wasn't there. But Æthelred kept trying to pay off the Viking invaders, which kind of created a problem in which, first of all, you were just kind of kicking the can down the road because the Vikings would just come back. But also, if a group learned that they had received payment, other Viking groups might come to see if they could get payment from the same king. It does go to show how wealthy the English kingdom was at this point. They were able to make so many payments of tribute to keep these Vikings at bay. However, he was having to pay a lot of money and wasn't really effectively dealing with the problem. And the Viking raids continued to occur. He did have some moments of, I wouldn't say military genius, but some good ideas throughout this, particularly as he got older. He, at one point, decided to use 2 Vikings who had come together, or one of them was Olaf, and there was 2 people who had kind of joined forces for the idea of raiding England, and he turned them against each other and was able to successfully kind of stop some stuff there. But as these raids continued, and a lot of these raids were to finance these individuals' personal schemes in Scandinavia, whether they were Danish, whether they were Norwegian. There were people coming to finance their schemes, and he couldn't stop this stem of attack, either militarily or even through tribute, so it was kind of viewed as an ineffective king. Some of these raiders were very, very powerful, including one guy by the name of, is it Sweyn Forkbeard? Sweyn Forkbeard actually succeeded in chasing out the king. So this is why Æthelred's reign is 978 to 1013, and then after that it's 1014 to 1016. So Sweyn Forkbeard was able to dislodge Æthelred, but he was able to go and seek refuge in Normandy, and this is because he had married a woman by the name of Emma of Normandy, which becomes very, very relevant later on. So he was able to find shelter among the Normans, but that marriage that I just referenced, Emma of Normandy, is the person by which William the Conqueror could claim to have a relationship with this line. A distant one, not a direct one, because, well, Æthelred gave birth to Edward the Confessor, who kind of kicked off the succession. That marriage to Emma of Normandy gave a Norman connection through Æthelred to the throne, that William the Conqueror could then claim he had some connection to England. He wasn't just a usurper from the outside coming in. There were other reasons that contributed to William the Conqueror coming in, including being believed that he had been given a promise of the English throne that Harold had turned his back on when he took the throne, but this marriage does come up again. However, Sweyn Forkbeard did not do so well health-wise, and he perished I think it was 5 or 6, or it wasn't even a full year, I don't believe it was a full year. And so the Witan, which is like this council, convenes, and they decide they would rather deal with a king that they know as opposed to some other stranger coming in. So they invite Æthelred back, but they make Æthelred promise that he's going to behave himself. Æthelred has a long history of doing terrible things, and some of his other actions include doing a massacre of Danish individuals who were living in the kingdom at the time. That was probably one of his worst ones, but it doesn't seem like he really changed too much of his tune, but he was invited back and he was able to finish out his reign from 1014 to 1016. He did die in 1016, and this led to the ascension of Edmund Ironside to the throne, and then with some other shifts and changes, eventually Edward the Confessor, which was his son through his wife, his second wife, Emma of Normandy. So Æthelred the Unready dealt with Viking attacks. He made poor decisions with regard to managing monastic lands, with monastic reform, with the way he managed the people around him, with paying tribute, and also really struggled to maintain his realm. The last section of this book, which is on page 105, says it clearly. On 23rd of April 1016, King Æthelred was buried in the church of St. Paul the Apostle with honors appropriate to a king. The chronicler's obituary is short and to the point. He ended his days on St. George's Day, and he held his kingdom with great toil and difficulties as long as his life lasted. And oh boy, did he really have a lot of difficulties and toil throughout his life. So when we look back at Æthelred's reign, at least from my perspective, some of these things were clearly his fault. Some of them were not learning his lessons about who to keep in charge, not thinking through all of his actions. He seemed to be quite impulsive, and he didn't always do maybe what the best thing should have been. Some of this, especially at the beginning, could have been contributed or attributed to his age. He was 16. I mean, how many of us would rule a kingdom effectively at 16? I'm sure at 16 he still had advisors and guidance, but he was really in charge. But he was probably very easily swayed at that age. But other things that occurred later in his life, like losing control of the kingdom to Sweyn Forkbeard and murdering a bunch of the massacre of Danish members of his realm in order to prevent mercenary activity, paint him in not so great a light. He dealt with a lot of treason, he dealt with a lot of plotting, he dealt with a lot of scheming, and this would have started very early on with his life. Remember, he came to the throne after probably his mother orchestrated the murder of his half-brother in order for him to gain the throne. So he was around this intrigue his entire life, and it kind of caught up with him at some point. Well, in many ways it caught up with him, but it felt like his court was out of control, the Viking attack was under control, and he really struggled his entire life to keep his realm under control, losing it for a little bit and having to go into exile. So, well, I don't think Æthelred deserves maybe... The failed king is kind of harsh because he did die the King of England, so he did die on English soil, he didn't die in exile, but I think it kind of shows some of the problems that were happening at this realm, and it showcases some things like that marriage to Emma of Normandy that foreshadow events that are going to happen in the future. As I read this book, I noticed a lot of similarities to The First Kingdom by Max Adams, which is a book describing the sub-Roman Britain period, which is the time when the Anglo-Saxons came into Britain and started. Basically, the First Kingdom is that time between the Romans left and when St. Augustine arrives in the island in 600 AD. And some of the things that are talked about in that First Kingdom book are things that started in the First Kingdom book are playing out in this time period. So if you are interested in this book, then I'm going to link the book review to that other book at the end of this video, and you can enjoy that one. If you have any thoughts, comments on this book, if you disagree with my assessment, if you have any related books you would like to recommend, please put it in the comment section down below. I love to receive it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have